He was the ambassador to Canada. Bruce Heyman is our guest. Good morning, Bruce.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing
Thank you.
well.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much for joining us. If you would, Bruce, tell us a little bit about National Security Leaders for America. What is their goal and why did you become a part of this?
Well, that's a really good question. National Security Leaders for America is really an offshoot of the original National Security Leaders for Biden, which came out of the 2020 campaign. And then the realization that the group that came together, which was really a nonpartisan group, just everybody very concerned about Donald Trump. And so we had Republicans, Democrats, we had people without any political affiliation joining in, military leaders, former military leaders, a lot of people who are deeply concerned about national security and deeply concerned about Donald Trump. So the combination of those two enabled this group not only to come together, but now is unfortunately thriving in the potential prospect of a Trump presidency.
We had spoken to Steve Anderson a
Yes.
couple of times, and he told us too. He said, "Trust me, I'm not a liberal. I've been a Republican my entire life." Was in the military for more than 30 years, and he said, "This isn't a Republican Democrat issue. This is a America issue."
It's completely an America issue, and we are we're sleepwalking a little bit into thinking about this in surface ways. Oh my God, he has a strong voice, or the economy was this way during this time, and maybe it would be that way again if he was president. No, he is the greatest threat to democracy that we've experienced, probably at least in the lifetime of everybody on the planet today. And he doesn't respect the rule of law. But we have alliances around the world that he is willing to throw out and abrogate. NATO is a perfect example with the big NATO anniversary meeting coming up in July in Washington. The language he's used, he doesn't understand what NATO is, or he's trying to reposition it in a way that is aligned in some nefarious way. It's a deterrence alliance. It's meant to deter war, and it's meant to deter war specifically with Russia. And it's not this monster 2% of GDP. It's not a dues paying 2% of GDP. Everybody should be building their own military capability so we can be together as a group and deter Russia. But he used language recently and he goes, "Hey, if you're not spending 2%, Russia, go do what you want with them." And I was
Yeah.
like, what kind of deterrence is that? I mean, that is just abrogates the whole concept of what NATO is.
Well, and Donald Trump seems to think that there is an account. Like every country has a NATO account and they have to make their monthly deposit like you're paying off a car.
Right.
That's not how it works.
Exactly. That's not how it works at all. And, because I know for a fact that he has said things like, well, wait a minute, let me understand this. If Russia attacks Estonia, the US is going to go to war with Russia over that? And the answer is yes. He's like, that's crazy. I said, no, it's not. It's all about deterrence. That's the whole concept. I mean, really, the defense budget and what we spend on defense is not to go to war, it's actually to prevent war. Now, if war happens, we want to have the capabilities to respond appropriately and win. But we don't want to go to war. Nobody wants to go to war. And the only way you don't is if you have the appropriate, counterpoint to somebody where they hesitate in going to war because of the implications of what would happen to them. And so I'm deeply concerned about the security, and I'm concerned it starts with Ukraine, and he gives up on Ukraine. And he says, why are we spending this money to help out Ukraine? Like, why? To prevent us from sending our troops into Europe to help defend Europe. I mean, could that be the best money ever spent? It's a super small percentage of the US budget. And yeah, we have a lot of problems elsewhere we could spend money on, but this is one of them. And so, you know, um, I am concerned in a Donald Trump next presidency that the world turns upside down in a lot of these ways, and national security is a threat.
And I think too, Bruce, we cannot say this enough that the biggest beneficiary if America withdraws from NATO is Vladimir Putin and Russia. This would be a big, big gift all wrapped up in a bow for Russia.
Oh my gosh. You remember when he met with Vladimir Putin and they sat down, and in the press conference, he said, "Look, I believe him
Yeah,
over the US intelligence."
Yeah.
Hello, your US intelligence officials are telling you that this guy is a threat and he's gotten involved in elections internationally and these things. And he goes, "Well, look, we sat across the table. He said he didn't do it." And I'm like, what planet are you on? And he kicked out his interpreter out of the room. I don't know
yeah.
what those conversations are, but he's the guy that shared some of our deepest secrets with Russia right there in the Oval Office and giving up human intelligence and likewise. And if he didn't share it with him, he sure put it all over his house in Mar-a-Lago with an incredible number of visitors in the bathroom and on the stage and everywhere else. So, yeah, Vladimir Putin is the big winner in a Donald Trump election, I think.
Sir, something that really it sticks with me every time someone asks the question in such a like, well, why are we even over there? We don't need to be doing this. We don't need to be spending this money. In my brain, the thing I'm always thinking about when it comes to Ukraine specifically, this is a country that is fighting for their freedom. There is a force trying to take over their country. They want freedom. We are a country that they specifically say all the time how great we are because how free we are. So the fact that Ukraine wants to enjoy that same sort of freedom is a no-brainer on why we should or should not be helping them. They want to be free. You love freedom, then we should be helping them. But since they're like, well, no, we don't need to be doing that. It's ridiculous. They can help themselves. No, they obviously can't. They need help, and we need to be there to help push this agenda of freedom for them. And it boggles my mind and angers me at the same time. And that's why we love having individuals like yourself, because it's easy to listen to us and say, well, they're just pushing the Biden agenda. They're just pushing the liberal agenda. No, we have experts in the field talking about how important it is. And I want to reiterate what you just said 8 minutes ago, that Donald Trump is the greatest threat to this country right now. And that is important to hear and understand that I'm not saying that, sir. Former Ambassador Bruce Heyman is saying that.
You know, as I listen to you speak and reflect on these comments, first of all, you're 100% right. Secondly, I know many Republicans and independents that understand this, but we have a cultish figure that is persuading some large group of people who don't fully understand the complexity of these things. And they are believing his narrative that is so incredibly dangerous. Mark Twain said it's easier to fool someone than to convince them they've been fooled.
Yes.
And so it's a really hard path we're on now to convince the MAGA supporters of Donald Trump that they're walking into a very bad place. And because they believe they're following some light that's taking them to some promised land. And even in deep interviews with people, when you ask them the pointed questions of what outcomes might happen, or were you aware of X, Y, or Z? They clearly don't know. All they're doing is just following some cultist figure. And so this is the world we're in. And oh, by the way, I don't underestimate the number of people that he's aligned in this thought process.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part.
If you're just joining us, our guest is the former ambassador to Canada. Bruce Heyman is here, and he's part of a group called National Security Leaders for America. Bruce, it's has struck me particularly in the last 5 6 years with figures like Tucker Carlson going to Russia and talking about how wonderful their grocery stores are and everything is beautiful and everything is wonderful. And I mean, the party of Reagan embracing Vladimir Putin is just mind blowing to me.
Isn't that scary?
It
I mean,
is. It's
you just think about
terrifying.
how this thing just got twisted all the way around. It was the Republican Party who I think, really marched forward in making sure that the US had a standing in the world that prevented such things. Whether it was John McCain or Reagan or, you named even the presidents before. And there were days I think I now can look back almost fondly for the Bushes and
Yeah.
Reagan. I'm like, wow, what
Yeah.
kind of world did we get to that I'm like literally thinking fondly of the former Republican presidents that represented the protection of democracy. And so, you know, it's changed. We're in a different world now. This is
Yeah.
just a
Yeah.
fact. And, this is going to be a very tight election. It's going to be incredibly close. One of the efforts that I've been trying to educate people on is that Americans living abroad have the right to vote. And they don't know that by a large number. And if they know it, they don't know how. And it's so easy. All you do is go to votefromabroad.org, votefromabroad.org. And you click on it and you just go down and figure out, how do I register? What do I do? But you need to register every year.
Yep.
It's a little bit harder process. You get a ballot sent to you and you have to mail it back. Yes, mail in ballots. But if you live in France, you can't just show up in Michigan for your voting day. That's just the way it works. And so there are some potential 5 million Americans living abroad that could vote in this election, and that could be the defining margin too.
We've talked to Democrats abroad,
Yes.
I
Correct. Yeah.
believe.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
about making sure that people who live abroad understand that they can vote and how important it is to vote. And there also remains this question, I think, of course, the one side says, well, all mail-in voting and all absentee ballot voting is all rigged and rotten, and we need to do away with it. And if they do away with mail-in voting, then what about all the people who live overseas?
Impossible. It's just impossible. They then you take their right to vote away. And by the way, that's protected by federal law.
Mhm.
The Federal Voting Assistance Program, which is actually run by the Defense Department of the U.S., because it was originally put together to ensure that uniformed officers could vote. And so this is an important aspect of our voting. And also, you get it; it's mail-in ballots. And you may remember Gabe Sterling coming out in Georgia. We're waiting for those votes from abroad. Yeah, at the margin, Americans living abroad won the state of Georgia and won the state of Arizona and could be a big contributor here.
Every vote counts. Every single vote counts. We've been saying this for months and months and months. We just had a text contest between our show and another show on the network. He beat us by 30 votes. Every vote counts.
Yes.
In something silly like our text contest, in something critically important like keeping American democracy. myvotewi.gov. Make sure you're registered. You can sign up. Everything you need to know is there, myvote.wi.gov. Our guest is the former ambassador to Canada, Bruce Heyman, is here. Bruce, can you stick around for another segment?
Sure.
Wonderful. Stay close. You're listening to Matt Nair on air. This is the Civic Media Radio Network. Good morning. Welcome back to Matt Nair on air. Jane Matt Nair, Greg Bach, Sweet Calby on the board, coming to you from our studio in hot downtown Waukesha. You can always join us. You can call, you can text at 855-752-4842, or leave a comment on the live stream if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or the platform Elon continues to actively ruin. Our guest is the former ambassador to Canada, Bruce Heyman, is here, and he is with an organization called National Security Leaders for America. And we're talking about why NATO is important and why it is important for America to stay in NATO. And we did have a comment from Tony Zimmerman that I wanted to share. A fractured West also benefits China. So yes, not only would America leaving NATO be a gift for Vladimir Putin, it would also be a big gift for Xi Jinping of China.
Oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. I was just recently with an amazing woman from the Ukraine who is teaching women at home while their partners, spouses, husbands are out fighting in the military, teaching them to fly drones to attack Russian troops. She's taught over 70,000 people. And I'm like,
Wow.
Goodness.
God, 70,000. Not her directly, like the teams of people are teaching.
Right.
And they have figured out that sending swarms. Now, the capabilities of the Ukrainians is so high at the engineering level that they continue to adapt and readapt these drones. But what she told me, I said, well, what about the Russians? How are their capabilities? She says, well, their capabilities behind us, but once they capture one of our drones, they can quickly analyze it and figure out what we've done. And then she said, but what we now know is they take that rediscovered technology, go straight to China,
Oh,
and mass produce drones to come back and attack us. And so they have to act very rapidly in continuing to develop that. But it's clear the Chinese have been very helpful to Vladimir Putin in this process. And we may not see it as directly, but I think, look, it's happening. There is an alliance that's there between Putin, Xi, and then you've got the folks in Iran and North Korea. And that's kind of the bad actors group that's come together on the other side of this wall of democracy that we put together in NATO and other, free voting and countries that are out there. And so, yes, that threat is real, and it's an alliance that's there that's real. And don't underestimate some large part of the problems we're seeing in the Middle East. You think it's just happened between these two peoples, the Jews and the Palestinians. Hello, there are really bad actors playing here and mixing things up. And, Russia and Iran have long been known bad actors in the region, and they're funding some large part of these bad actions.
and if America leaves NATO, we are giving them a great big gift. I just think it's important that people understand that this would have disastrous ramifications if America pulls out of NATO.
I think that, and that's why we're going to keep talking about this and having individuals like Bruce on the show to discuss it because of their expertise. The the thing, and I mentioned this to you before, Jane, and I don't know, and I apologize. I don't want this to come off sounding any sort of conspiracy theory, but we were talking about the fact that now there almost seems to be two Chinas that are referred to in America. There is China, the Xi Jinping, the guy that Trump thinks is a great guy. China's wonderful. All these, a great leader for his people. And now when they want to delineate between the good and the bad, they say Chinese Communist Party China, to sort of almost say there are two factions here. When it's really what you're talking about, Bruce, it's one country led by one man who is making these decisions to work with another man who is trying to steal freedom and try to help create a narrative in this country to lead our a guy who should not be president. I mean, that sounds like a lot, and I don't want to sound crazy, but when I listen to GOP leaders talk, when they want to slag off China, they say communist China, Communist Party China. But then when we talk about Xi Jinping, it's just China. It's great. He's wonderful.
So it's a nuanced conversation, and it's very different than Russia. Russia actually is a small economic power these days. People like, oh my God, it's Russia. Russia's lucky to be even in the G20 at this stage,
Seriously.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
what we have is what they have that makes the whole difference is they have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
They actually don't have a military that's all that capable, and we've been watching them in action, and we've learned a lot over the last few years. But we know that they have nuclear bombs, and they constantly, casually make these threats to use them. This is very different than China today. Now, China today is the second largest economic power in the world, and that we're going to have to figure out how to work with China on a going forward basis. And it can't be all hostile. If we're going to solve climate change and climate problems in the world, you can't take the second largest economy in the world and not be partners with them in some way to figure this out. And so China's got to be at a very different level. And you see Secretary of State Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, do this dance of understanding that China is an important relationship for us, but also in other cases an adversary. In other cases, it's a partner. And so it's a much more complicated relationship. Russia is just a problem,
Yeah.
and it's a problem at every level. And the threat is real, and very complicated in that regard.
Well, and I think what has been pointed out too by some of our former guests from National Security Leaders for America, just that the Ukrainians have done an incredible job of of really harming the Russian military, not just manpower, but equipment and everything. So this, at least from America's standpoint, has been a pretty good investment.
Yeah, I mean, rather see no war here at all. I'd rather see
Yeah,
the
of course.
Of
Russians not make
course.
the attack. I don't want to get too excited that we've degraded. We've seen the degradation of the Russian military as a result of this. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost as a
Yes,
result of this crazy campaign that Putin's doing. I think we Americans just need to make sure um, that he doesn't win in this, because if he does, then what's to say you can't do Moldova? What's to say you can't do the Baltics? And that's where we are.
absolutely. He is the former ambassador to Canada and a member of the National Security Leaders for America. Bruce Heyman has been our guest. Thank you so much, Bruce. We would love to have you back.
Pleasure. Good to be with you, and stay cool in Waukesha.
Thank you
Absolutely.
very
Thank
much,
you so
sir.
much. Stay close. News is